The mess hall of Haven Station buzzed with the usual cacophony of a dozen species trying to coexist in the cold vacuum of space. Sergeant Kellen Hayes sat hunched over his regulation protein pack, his weathered face bearing the kind of scars that only came from real combat, not the sanitized training simulations the newer recruits bragged about. At 34, he'd seen 3 border wars and more alien refugees than he cared to count. His gray eyes tracked movement across the crowded hall, settling on the lone figure seated in the corner. She was hard to miss. Pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the harsh fluorescent lighting, and cascading waves of deep red hair that fell past her shoulders like liquid copper. Vera Solis, the station's newest translator, assigned to help process the endless stream of displaced aliens seeking sanctuary in human space. "Look at her," Kellen muttered to his squad mate, Corporal Briggs, who was mechanically shoveling food into his mouth. Sitting there all quiet and dignified like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. Briggs glanced up, following Kellen's gaze. "She's just doing her job, Sarge. Haven't heard a peep of trouble from any of the translators." "That's exactly the problem." Kellen's voice carried further than he intended, drawing glances from nearby tables. "Her whole species, the Valdari, right? They're all the same. Passive, weak. They let their entire homeworld get overrun because they were too civilized to fight back properly." Vera's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, but she continued eating, her movements controlled and precise. Her violet eyes remained fixed on her meal, though Kellen noticed her grip tighten on her utensil. "Now they come running to us," Kellen continued, his voice growing louder as other conversations began to quiet. "Expecting human soldiers to die protecting them while they hide behind their fancy words and diplomatic immunity." A Regellian merchant at a nearby table shifted uncomfortably, his tentacles curling inward. The mess hall's atmosphere grew thick with tension as more beings turned to listen. This wasn't the first time Kellen had voiced such opinions, but never quite so publicly. Vera finally looked up, her alien features composed but her eyes holding depths that seemed older than her apparent years. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but carried clearly in the suddenly quiet space. "Perhaps, Sergeant Hayes, you mistake strategy for cowardice." Her accent carried musical notes that made even harsh words sound elegant. "Not every victory requires the crude application of violence." Kellen laughed harshly, the sound echoing off the metal walls. "Strategy? Your people's strategy got them conquered and scattered across the galaxy like cosmic debris. If you'd fought half as hard as you talk, maybe you'd still have a homeworld to go back to." The words hit their mark. Vera's pale blue skin seemed to grow even paler, and for just a moment, something fierce and dangerous flickered in her violet eyes, like lightning trapped in crystal. Around the hall, various alien species watched with growing unease. Some had heard stories about the Valdari, whispered tales from before their fall that painted a very different picture than the quiet refugees they'd become. "You know nothing of what we sacrificed," Vera said quietly, rising from her seat with fluid grace. Despite her slender build, something in her posture commanded attention. "Nothing of what we endured." Kellen stood as well, his stocky frame and combat-ready stance a sharp contrast to her elegant composure. "I know enough. I know that when the shooting starts, your people fold faster than a bad poker hand. And I know that it's human blood paying for your second chances." The mess hall had gone completely silent now. Even the usual hum of the station's life support systems seemed muted. Vera stepped forward, and several beings instinctively moved back, though she showed no signs of aggression. "Sergeant Hayes," she said, her voice taking on a formal cadence that seemed to resonate with ancestral authority. "You speak of truths you cannot possibly understand. Perhaps it is time you learned what truth actually looks like." Something in her tone made Kellen's military instincts prickle with warning, though he couldn't identify the threat. The silence in the mess hall stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Vera stood motionless, her red hair catching the light like flames, while Kellen's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the watching crowd. "Truth?" Kellen scoffed, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Something about the way she stood, The subtle shift in her posture reminded him of predators he'd faced in combat. The only truth here is that your people are living on borrowed time and borrowed protection. You speak of cowardice, Vera said, her voice growing stronger, carrying undertones that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. You call us weak because we fell to overwhelming numbers, because we chose exile over extinction. But you know nothing of the battles we fought, the prices we paid. An elderly Centaurian at a corner table whispered something to his companion, in their clicking language. The word Shaldar drifted across the room, causing several alien heads to turn sharply toward Vera. Kellen caught the whisper. What's Shaldar? Some kind of prayer to make the bad human go away? For the first time since the confrontation began, Vera smiled, but it wasn't the gentle expression the station inhabitants had grown accustomed to. This smile held edges sharp enough to cut. Shaldar is the right of truth, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent hall. A sacred duel where two souls are laid bare, where shame and honor are weighed in the balance of absolute honesty. The Centaurian elder stood abruptly, his forearms gesticulating frantically. Young warrior, he said in heavily accented standard, the old ways are dangerous, not meant for. I am no longer young, Vera interrupted, never, taking her eyes off Kellen. And these are not the old days, but truth remains truth regardless of time or place. Kellen felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. To back down now would undermine every ounce of authority he'd built on this station. Fine. Whatever mystical nonsense you want to play at, I'm game. But when this is over, I don't want to hear another word about how misunderstood your people are. You will hear many words, Sergeant Hayes, Vera said, beginning to move in a slow circle around him. But they will not be mine. The crowd pressed closer, forming a rough circle around the two combatants. Someone dimmed the overhead lights, leaving only the emergency illumination casting long shadows across the floor. Vera reached up and pulled two decorative pins from her hair, letting the red waves fall free around her shoulders. The pins, Kellen now noticed, were not mere ornaments. They bore intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The rite requires contact, Vera explained, holding out one of the pins. Physical touch to establish the psychic bridge. Are you prepared to see yourself as I will see you? Kellen hesitated for just a moment. Every instinct screamed at him that this was dangerous territory, but pride won over caution. He took the offered pin, immediately feeling a strange warmth spread up his arm. In the old traditions, Vera continued, beginning to speak in a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. Warriors would share their truths before battle so that death would hold no secrets. Today we share truths so that life might hold understanding. She pressed her pin against her palm, and Kellen felt compelled to do the same. The moment both pins touched flesh, the world exploded into sensation. Suddenly, Kellen wasn't standing in the mess hall anymore. He was on a world of crystalline spires and floating gardens, watching as dark ships blotted out twin suns. Through Vera's eyes he saw herself, but not as the quiet translator he knew. This Vera wore armor of living metal that flowed like liquid mercury, her red hair braided with weapons, her eyes blazing with power that could level mountains. Thane warrior, Vera of the Crimson Guard. A voice that was his own thoughts but not his own words whispered in his mind. Protector of the sacred groves, keeper of the third seal, daughter of the storm-touched. He watched through her memories as she led charge after desperate charge against impossible odds. Saw her standing over the bodies of her fallen comrades, weaving shields of pure psychic energy while evacuation ships fled to safety. Felt her anguish as she made the choice to abandon her world. Not from cowardice, but because someone had to survive to remember what they had been. The images shifted, showing him other scenes. Vera working in refugee camps, using her warrior, training to protect human settlements from raiders, standing guard over mixed groups of human and alien children while their parents worked dangerous salvage operations. Always protecting, always serving, never seeking recognition or thanks. But the psychic bridge worked both ways. As Kellen experienced Vera's truth, she was seeing his, and what she found there made her gasp aloud in the physical world. She saw a younger Kellen, barely 18, standing over a field medic station on Kepler Prime. Saw him holding the hand of a dying boy who couldn't have been more than 16, his brother Danny, who'd lied about his age to enlist and follow his hero into the stars. I should have stopped him. Kellen's mental voice was raw with years of suppressed pain. I should have known he wasn't ready. Should have sent him home. Through Vera's perception, Kellen felt his own guilt as she experienced it. The crushing weight of responsibility. The way he'd hardened his heart against caring too much because caring led to loss and loss led to the kind of pain that could break a person. The vision expanded, showing Vera how Kellen's prejudice against aliens had grown from that moment. Not from hatred, but from fear. Fear that caring about anyone not human, not under his direct protection, would lead to more failure, more loss he couldn't prevent. As the psychic connection reached its peak, both warriors stood trembling in the mess hall, tears streaming down their faces as they experienced not just each other's memories but each other's pain and nobility in perfect, unfiltered clarity. When the connection finally broke, they staggered apart, both gasping as if they'd been underwater. The watching crowd remained silent, understanding that they'd witnessed something profound and sacred. Kellen looked at Vera with new eyes, seeing not the quiet refugee but the warrior protector she'd always been, and Vera looked back at him, seeing not the bitter soldier but the broken guardian trying to atone for a failure that had never truly been his fault. Kellen started to speak, then stopped, unable to find words adequate for what had just passed between them. Truth has been shared, Vera said softly, her voice hoarse from the psychic strain. The rite is complete. But both of them knew that something else had just begun. 3 days had passed since the rite of Shaldar, and Haven Station felt different, charged with an energy that seemed to hum in the walls themselves. Kellen found himself avoiding the usual routes through the station, taking longer paths that inevitably led him past the translator's office where Vera worked. He wasn't the only one affected. Word of the psychic duel had spread through the station like wildfire, carried by whispered conversations and knowing glances. The other aliens looked at Vera with a new mixture of respect and wariness, while the human crew members watched Kellen with curious eyes, wondering what exactly they'd witnessed in that mess hall. On the third evening, Kellen finally worked up the courage to approach Vera's quarters. He'd rehearsed what he wanted to say, an apology, an explanation, maybe even a thank you. But when the door chimed open, all his prepared words fled. Vera stood before him in simple civilian clothes, a flowing tunic the color of deep space and fitted pants that accentuated her alien grace. Her red hair was loose around her shoulders, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked vulnerable. "I wondered when you would come," she said softly, stepping aside to let him enter. Her quarters were sparse but comfortable, decorated, with a few pieces that spoke of her heritage, crystalline wind chimes that created haunting melodies, a small shrine with symbols he now recognized as warriors' honors, and a hollow frame displaying what must have been her homeworld before the fall. "I keep thinking about what I saw," Kellen said, settling into the chair she offered. "Your memories, they felt more real than my own sometimes." Vera poured 2 cups of something that smelled like cinnamon and starlight. "The rite creates lasting bonds. It's why my people use it sparingly and never lightly." She handed him a cup, their fingers brushing for just a moment, enough to send a small jolt of recognition through both of them. "I saw how you really fought," Kellen continued, studying her face. "Not just the battles, but the way you protected everyone, humans included, even when some of them probably looked at you the same way I did." Vera settled into the chair across from him, cradling her cup between her hands. "I also saw your brother," she said gently. "Danny. He looked like you, but softer somehow. Less guarded." Kellen's jaw tightened at the mention of his brother's name, but he didn't pull away from the conversation. The psychic connection had stripped away his ability to hide from this pain. He was 17, lied about his age to enlist because he wanted to be like his big brother. His voice cracked slightly. I found out later he'd been writing letters home, telling our parents about all the adventures we were having together. He died believing in you, Vera said. I felt that in your memories. His last thoughts weren't of fear or regret. They were of pride. Pride that he got to serve beside his hero. Some hero, Kellen muttered, staring into his cup. I couldn't even keep one kid safe. Vera leaned forward, her violet eyes intense. And I couldn't keep an entire world safe. Does that make me a failure? The question hung in the air between them. Kellen looked up, meeting her gaze directly for the first time since entering her quarters. No, he said quietly. I saw what you did, the choices you made. You saved everyone you could. As did you. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You've spent 15 years saving people, Kellen. I've watched you since I arrived here. Every patrol, every security briefing, every time you put yourself between danger and the innocents on this station. You honor your brother's memory with every life you protect. Something shifted in the space between them, a recognition that went deeper than the psychic bond they'd shared. Kellen found himself really looking at her, seeing not just the warrior or the refugee, but the woman who sat across from him. The way her alien features combined strength and delicacy, how her red hair caught the soft light from the shrine, the gentle curve of her mouth as she offered him understanding instead of judgment. I don't understand what's happening, he admitted. Since the rite, I can't stop thinking about you, about what we shared. Vera set down her cup and moved to sit on the small couch, patting the space beside her. When Kellen joined her, she took his hand in both of hers, her skin warm and slightly luminescent in the dim light. My people believe that some bonds transcend species, transcend the physical realm, she said. The rite doesn't just share truth. It recognizes souls that are meant to understand each other. Kellen felt his heart racing as she spoke, her thumb tracing gentle patterns on his palm. Are you saying we're connected? Like permanently? I'm saying, Vera said, shifting closer so that her shoulder touched his, that for the first time since my world fell, I don't feel alone. The confession hung between them, honest and raw. Kellen turned to face her fully, his free hand reaching up to touch her cheek. Her skin was incredibly soft, warmer than human flesh, and when she leaned into his touch, he felt that same jolt of recognition they'd experienced during the rite. Vera, he whispered, her name sounding different on his lips now, not foreign, but precious. She closed her eyes, savoring the contact. When I invoked the rite, I thought I was just defending my people's honor. I never expected to find this, Kellen finished, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. She opened her eyes and looked at him with an expression so tender it made his chest ache. To find you. They were leaning closer now, drawn together by something that went beyond physical attraction. The psychic bond had shown them each other's souls, stripped away all pretense and walls, leaving only the raw truth of two damaged people who had found unexpected understanding. Just as their lips were about to meet, Kellen's calm unit chirped with an urgent security alert. They sprang apart, the spell broken but not forgotten. All senior personnel to stations, the comm crackled. Unknown vessels approaching. This is not a drill. Kellen stood reluctantly, his body already shifting into military mode. I have to go. Vera rose as well. And for a moment they stood facing each other, both breathing slightly harder than the interrupted kiss warranted. Be careful, she said, reaching out to adjust his uniform collar, an intimate gesture that sent warmth spreading through his chest. We'll finish this conversation, he promised, heading toward the door. I'll hold you to that, she replied, but her voice carried a note of worry that made him look back. She was standing by her shrine, her fingers touching, one of the warrior's honors mounted there. In the soft light, she looked like a goddess preparing for battle, beautiful and terrible and absolutely magnificent. As Kellen hurried toward the command center, he couldn't shake the feeling that their interrupted moment had been more than coincidence. Something was coming to Haven Station, something that would test not just their defenses but the fragile new bond growing between a broken soldier and a warrior in exile. The approaching ships turned out to be a false alarm, a merchant convoy with faulty transponders, but the incident had shaken something loose in the careful routine of Haven Station. Over the following week, Kellen found himself seeking out Vera's company with increasing frequency, and she seemed equally drawn to him. Their first official meeting came under the pretense of security protocols. Kellen had requested that all civilian department heads review emergency procedures, but when Vera arrived at his office, they both knew the real reason for the invitation. Your translation department's evacuation route could be improved, Kellen said, spreading station schematics across his desk. If we moved your primary exit point here. He leaned closer to point at the display, very aware of her presence beside him. That would put us closer to the main refugee quarters, Vera observed, her shoulder brushing his as she studied the plans. My people would be more comfortable knowing they could reach their families quickly. Your people, Kellen repeated, then caught himself. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... No, Vera interrupted gently, placing her hand over his on the desk. They are my people, just as these humans are yours. The rite showed me how deeply you care for everyone under your protection. Her touch sent familiar warmth up his arm, and Kellen found himself turning his hand palm up to intertwine their fingers. Is it always like this, after the rite? I don't know, Vera admitted. I've never performed Shaldar with anyone outside my species before, and never with someone who... She trailed off, color rising in her pale blue cheeks. Who what? Kellen prompted, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. Someone who makes me want to forget I was ever a warrior, she whispered. The confession hit him like a physical blow. He stood, pulling her up with him until they were facing each other across the small space between desk and wall. I don't want you to forget, he said fiercely. What I saw during the rite, your strength, your courage, that's part of who you are. It's part of what I... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. It was too soon, too fast, but the psychic bond had accelerated everything between them. What you feel for me? Vera finished softly. Instead of answering with words, Kellen cupped her face in his hands and finally claimed the kiss they'd been interrupted from days before. Her lips were softer than he'd imagined, and when she melted against him, her arms winding around his neck, he felt like he was coming home to a place he'd never known he was searching for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vera rested her forehead against his. This is complicated, she murmured. Everything worth having is complicated, Kellen replied, his hands settling on her waist. Over the following days, they began spending their off-duty hours together, learning each other in ways that went beyond the psychic connection. Kellen discovered that Vera had a sharp sense of humor hidden beneath her diplomatic exterior, and that she could beat him at three-dimensional chess while carrying on a conversation about station logistics. Vera learned that Kellen was an accomplished cook, having taken over meal preparation for his unit during his early military days, and that he had a secret fondness for ancient Earth poetry. Their relationship deepened through small intimacies, shared meals in Vera's quarters, late-night conversations about their respective worlds, quiet moments when Kellen would run his fingers through her red hair while she traced the scars on his arms and chest, each mark a story of battles fought and survived. One evening, as they lay together on Vera's couch after dinner, Kellen asked the question that had been troubling him. What happens when the war ends, when your people find a new homeworld? He was lying on his back, Vera curled against his side, her head on his chest. I don't know, she said honestly. The Valdari are a nomadic people now. Some will want to settle, to rebuild what we lost. Others... She lifted her head to look at him. Others might choose to make their home wherever they find it. And you? His hand stilled in her hair. I've spent so long focusing on duty, on protecting others, that I never considered what I might want for myself. She shifted to lie fully on top of him, her eyes serious. Until now. What do you want now? Kellen asked, his hand sliding up her back. I want mornings where I wake up beside you, she said, leaning down to kiss his jaw. I want to teach you the combat techniques of my people and learn more about human tactics from you. That can be arranged, he murmured, tilting his head to give her better access to his neck. I want to see you smile more, she continued, punctuating each word with a kiss. The way you smiled when you beat me at poker last night. You let me win, Kellen accused, his hands finding the hem of her tunic. Prove it, Vera challenged, sitting up to straddle his hips. What followed was a different kind of battle. One fought with gentle touches and whispered endearments, with the slow exploration of alien and human forms learning to fit together perfectly. When Vera finally pulled her tunic over her head, Kellen thought she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Her pale blue skin luminescent in the dim light, her red hair falling like silk around her shoulders. Are you sure? He asked, his warrior's discipline warring with his desperate need for her. I've never been more sure of anything, she replied, beginning to work at the fastenings of his uniform. They made love with the intensity of people who had found something precious and unexpected, their bodies speaking a language that transcended species barriers. When Kellen traced the patterns of bioluminescence that appeared on Vera's skin during moments of passion, she gasped and arched beneath him, her own hands mapping the geography of his scars with reverent care. Afterward, as they lay entwined, in her bed, Vera traced lazy patterns on Kellen's chest while he played with her hair. I should probably go back to my quarters, he said reluctantly. Regulations about fraternization. Stay, Vera whispered against his neck. Let regulations wait until morning. Kellen tightened his arms around her, feeling more content than he had in years. I love you, he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Vera went very still for a moment, then lifted her head to look at him, her violet eyes bright with unshed tears. In my language, she said softly, we say Teltan, Saidrath. It means my soul recognizes your soul. It's what bondmates say to each other. Telthane Saidrath, Kellen repeated carefully, the alien words feeling strange but right on his tongue. Telthane Saidrath, Vera echoed, sealing the words with a kiss that tasted like promises and forever. As they settled into sleep, neither of them noticed the subtle change in the station's ambient lighting, or the way the emergency communication system's ready light began blinking faster than usual. Tomorrow would bring challenges that would test everything they'd built together, but for now, they had this perfect moment of peace. In the depths of space, dark ships moved silently toward Haven Station, their intentions as cold and deadly as the vacuum between the stars. The attack came at Euro 347 station time, during the quiet hours when most of Haven Station's inhabitants were asleep. Kellen woke to the harsh blare of combat alarms, his military instincts instantly pulling him from the depths of peaceful sleep to full alertness. Beside him, Vera was already sitting up, her pale blue skin seeming to glow with an inner light that Kellen had learned appeared when her warrior instincts were triggered. How many ships? She asked, already moving toward where her clothes lay scattered from the night before. Kellen was pulling on his uniform, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Sounds like a full assault pattern. Multiple vectors. He activated his comm unit. Hayes here. Sarge, we need you in command now. Corporal Briggs's voice crackled through the speaker. 12 hostiles, Korthak design. They've got us surrounded and they're not responding to hails. Kellen's blood chilled. The Korthak were raiders, known for taking no prisoners and leaving no survivors. ETA to weapons range? 6 minutes, maybe less. On my way. Kellen closed the comm and turned to find Vera fastening some kind of ceremonial armor over her civilian clothes. The pieces seemed to flow like liquid metal, conforming to her body and glowing with the same bioluminescent patterns he'd traced, with his lips hours before. Where did that come from, he asked, even as part of him recognized the armor from the memories they'd shared during the rite. I never travel anywhere without it, Vera said, checking the power levels on what looked like energy weapons built into the armor's gauntlets. Old habits from the war. Kellen reached for her, pulling her against him for what might be their last kiss. I love you, he said fiercely. Tell Thayan Saidrath, she replied, her hand cupping his cheek. "Now go save our people." The next hour was a nightmare of coordinated chaos. The Korthak had planned their attack well, striking at multiple points simultaneously to divide the station's defenses. Kellen found himself leading a squad through the lower levels, trying to prevent the raiders from reaching the civilian shelters where hundreds of refugees and non-combatant personnel were hiding. The fighting was brutal and close quarters, the narrow corridors of the station turning into killing grounds where superior numbers meant everything. Kellen's squad held their positions admirably, but they were being slowly pushed back toward the main refugee center. "Fall back to checkpoint 7, Kellen ordered, reloading his rifle as plasma bolts sizzled past his head. "We'll make our stand. There." That's when the explosion hit. A Korthak breaching charge tore through the bulkhead beside him, and Kellen felt the deck disappear beneath his feet as the section began to decompress. Emergency force fields slammed into place, but not before the blast had sent him tumbling into a maintenance shaft that promptly collapsed, trapping him behind a wall of twisted metal and sparking conduits. "Hayes! Hayes, respond!" His comm crackled, with voices, but the signal was weak and distorted. Kellen tried to move and immediately regretted it as pain shot through his left leg. A piece of debris had pinned him against the far wall of the shaft, and his rifle was nowhere to be seen. Through gaps in the wreckage, he could see the corridor beyond, where the distinctive silhouettes of Korthak warriors were advancing toward the refugee center. "This is Hayes," he managed to get out over the comm. "I'm trapped in maintenance shaft 7 Delta, legs pinned, multiple hostiles approaching refugee center from Vector 3. "Copy that, Sarge. We're trying to get to you, but..." The comm went dead as another explosion shook the station. Kellen closed his eyes and tried to calculate how long it would take the raiders to break through to the civilians. Too long for any rescue to reach him, and without the defensive position at checkpoint 7, there was nothing to stop the Korthak from reaching their targets. He was thinking about Vera, wondering if she was safe, when he heard the sound. It started low, almost below the range of human hearing, but built quickly into something that made the hair on his arms stand up. A harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate in his bones, accompanied by a rhythmic pulsing of light that filtered through the gaps in the debris. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The sound of a Valdari warrior's battle song. Through a crack in the wreckage, Kellen watched in amazement as Vera appeared in the corridor, moving like liquid death through the advancing Korthak forces. Her armor blazed with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and flowed with each movement, and the energy weapons in her gauntlets fired in perfect synchronization with her steps. She wasn't just fighting, she was dancing, each motion part of a deadly choreography that turned the narrow corridor into her personal battlefield. The Korthak, despite their reputation as fierce warriors, fell back before her advance, their own weapons seeming clumsy and slow compared to her fluid grace. This is what she was, Kellen realized, watching her cut through enemies that would have challenged his entire squad. This is who she really is. But even as he marveled at her skill, he could see the tactical situation. More Korthak were flooding in from side passages, trying to flank her position. She was magnificent, but she was also alone and outnumbered. "Vera," he called out, hoping his voice would carry over the sounds of battle. "Behind you." She spun, her armor's defensive systems deflecting a plasma bolt that would have taken her head off, but the movement cost her momentum. The Korthak began to press their advantage, forcing her back toward his position. That's when Kellen saw her plan. She wasn't just fighting a running battle. She was leading the raiders directly toward the collapsed maintenance shaft where he was trapped. As she backed into the small space in front of the debris pile, the Korthak followed, bunching up in the narrow passage exactly as she'd intended. "Kellen," she called out, breathing hard from the sustained combat. "When I give the signal, cover your ears and close your eyes. What are you?" "Now." Kellen barely had time to follow her instructions before Vera's armor erupted in a brilliant flash of light and sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the station. When his vision cleared, the Korthak lay scattered and unconscious throughout the corridor, and Vera was kneeling beside the wreckage that trapped him, her hands already working to move the debris. "That was quite a show," Kellen said weakly, trying to help shift the weight off his leg. "Valdari warriors have many tricks," Vera replied, but he could see the strain in her face. The sustained battle and the final energy discharge had cost her. How did you know where to find me? Vera paused in her work to look at him, her violet eyes soft with emotion. The bond we share through the right. I can sense you, feel your location when you're in danger. She resumed working at the debris. I felt your fear, your pain. I couldn't lose you, not when I just found you. Together they managed to free his leg, though Kellen had to lean heavily on her as they made their way back toward the main defensive positions. Around them, the sounds of battle were beginning to fade as the station's defenders, rallied by Vera's assault, pushed back the remaining raiders. So, Kellen said as they walked, trying to keep the mood light despite the pain shooting through his injured leg. Was this your way of showing me those Valdari combat techniques you mentioned? Vera laughed, the sound like music in the battle-scarred corridor. That was just the basic forms. Wait until I show you the advanced lessons. I can hardly wait, Kellen replied, pulling her closer and pressing a kiss to her temple. As they reached the command center, where Corporal Briggs was coordinating the final cleanup operations, Kellen realized that something fundamental had changed. Not just between him and Vera, but in how the station's inhabitants looked at both of them. The refugees no longer saw just a quiet translator, but the warrior protector she'd always been. And the human crew no longer saw just their sergeant, but a man who'd found something worth fighting for beyond duty alone. So what happens now? Vera asked as they settled into the medical bay, where a harried doctor was checking Kellen's leg for serious damage. Now, Kellen said, taking her hand in his and intertwining their fingers. We figure out how to build a life together. Here, or wherever the universe takes us next. Teltain Seedrath, Vera whispered, leaning down to kiss him gently. Teltain Seedrath, Kellen replied, finally understanding that some bonds were strong enough to bridge any distance, whether between species, worlds, or hearts. Outside the medical bay's viewport, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of love and war played out on a tiny station in the vast dark. But for two souls who had found each other across the impossible gulf of prejudice and pain, those distant suns seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself approved of what they'd built together from the ashes of their separate tragedies. The future stretched before them, uncertain but no longer empty, filled with the promise of mornings spent in each other's arms and battles fought side by side. Two warriors who had learned that the greatest victory was not in conquest, but in finding someone whose soul recognized your own.